Hello there, my friends. I'm Pittsburgh Pat, and I'm here with Kris Scanlon. How are you today, Kris?
I'm very well, thank you, Pat.
It's great to
Glad to
see
see you.
you.
Good to see you as well.
Yeah. So Kris and I are going to talk about Buddhism. We're going to talk about Carl Jung, and we're going to talk about Caddyshack today. So stay tuned for that. First, though, if you could smash the like button for us and even subscribe to the channel, that's great. That helps promote this video so more people can be exposed to Kris's wisdom and my prattling on. But no, let's do the algorithm a good term and press like for us. And but first, before we get to our subjects at hand, we're going to find out a little more about Kris. So we're going to do that lightning round that I like to do. So I'm going to ask you a couple questions, Kris, a la game show host, and just answer what comes to mind. What is the last song that you listened to?
Oh, the last song I listened to, which would be a few days ago, and actually it's been on repeat for 2 weeks, is "Giving It Up for Your Love" by Delbert McClinton.
Oh, Delbert McClinton. Nice. All
Yeah.
right. What's the last book that you read, or are you reading a book right now?
I'm reading a book right now, "Thirst for Wholeness," right here, by Christina Groff, Attachment Addiction and the Spiritual Path.
So far, you like it? Would you recommend
So
it?
far, oh, I like it real well. I like it really, really well. Very interesting.
Are you an iPhone or an Android user?
I am an Android user. Do not like iPhones at all.
Understood. What's the last thing you had to eat?
That is an interesting question. I'm going to go with wheat crackers that come in a package. There's like 6 of them. I'm going to go with that answer. That was probably literally the last thing.
Sounds good. If you saw 2 articles side by side, one was on astrology and one was on astronomy, which one would you read first?
Oh, astrology.
Astrology. And do you have a secret superpower? Something that people look at you and they may not be aware that you are capable of doing? Like I shoot pool, for example.
I can guess people's heights and weights very, very well.
Have you ever done that at a carnival? Have you ever done that at an amusement park?
I have actually, as a matter of fact. I took on, this was about 28 years ago at Cedar Point, and I was able to do it. I'm pretty accurate. Don't know. It's just a weird superpower.
So did they train you, or you were just a natural at that?
I'm just a natural. I can just figure people's heights and weights based upon my own. It's pretty accurate for the most part. I can guess that.
That is a superpower. If you woke up tomorrow and you could have one ability, what would it be? Like just you could play piano.
I woke up to, can you repeat that again?
If you woke up tomorrow, you could have one new ability that you didn't previously have.
Oh, to be more efficient in mathematics.
Mathematics. And if you could travel in time, where would you go? When would you?
I'd probably go to 1975.
Really? Why 1975?
I just liked it. I liked the year. I liked the films. I thought it was like a nice mix of what came before and what was to happen after. I thought it was a great, yeah, it was a bridge to great things, at least culturally to me, an innocent time. Perhaps I liked films. I liked the music. Just kind of the bridge. You got some of that 60s, you got some of that 70s vibe, and then late 70s things got a little different.
That's cool. Great.
Me.
Well, 75 films. I'm trying to think. I mean, we're going to talk about Caddyshack, obviously, but Jaws was 75.
Jaws was 1975. Yeah, that's absolutely true.
Scared the pants off everybody. People didn't even want to take baths.
I wasn't able to go see that at the theater. I wasn't allowed. My brothers and sisters were, but since I was the youngest, my mom did not allow me. Trying to think off the top of my head, 1975. I don't think Black Sunday was 1970.
Oh, the Super Bowl movie. Yeah.
Yeah, so it was a Steelers theme in it. So that's 1975 as well.
That's a good
One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest.
Oh, wow. There's a powerhouse of film right there. Yeah.
Right there. So that's in itself. So there's some good ones in there.
So what should we talk about first? Do you want to talk about a little bit about Buddhism first?
Sure. I like to talk about Buddhism. It's an interesting one.
How'd you get interested? I mean, obviously we live in kind of a Judeo-Christian Western culture. So Buddhism isn't usually on the table for us at an early age. So is there a way that you discovered it, or am I wrong? Was it introduced to you at a very young age?
It was not introduced to me at a very young age. It is something that I just sought out on my own, out of my own interest, or my own personal beliefs to help me along my path. I guess it was probably from my love for all things comic book oriented, and seeing a lot of karate type movies. So there's some cinematic aspects to it that I enjoyed. that I had seen before. I believe you're a Star Wars fan, so there's a lot of that kind of going through there with Yoda and some of the way he speaks, that Zen Buddhism and different Buddhism. I can only say that I'm a novice of Buddhism, but it certainly gives me a peace of mind and a code to my road and path that I'm on.
Gotcha. Yeah, I came through it through the martial arts as well. That seemed to be my introduction to it as well. Zen Buddhism specifically.
Yes.
But yeah, so the other day we were talking. Actually, you have a Facebook group.
Yes, I do.
What's that called?
That is called Jung, Recovery and Philosophy, where I cover Dr. Carl Jung, the great Swiss psychologist, psychotherapist, and all things that are philosophy. I didn't want to go with strictly just Buddhism, so I have a lot of different philosophy. It could be Confucianism, it could be Judeo-Christian, but there is a lot of different forms of Buddhism, Zen Buddhism, the different forms in there that I put in there. I try to give the different aspects of that, and then add stuff that's some recovery oriented for people, since what I do for a living is work in recovery field. There's some interesting how that all kind of crosses over into each other in the world of recovery.
So do you think that there are aspects of Buddhism and Jungianism, if, for lack of a better term, the writings of Carl Jung, they like mesh? Do you think there's some crossover there?
Oh, very much so, between Jung and Buddhism, very much so. He was very much interested. He studied all great religions, and he spoke many languages. So there's lots of crossover into that. He believed in the middle path, and believed in that. And so a lot of that rebirth that's happening, that you see in Buddhism, he too was interested in that, since he believed in a lot of spiritualism. He was alchemy, a lot of different things that really a lot of people debunked him then, and thought he totally went off the mark and went away from his main influence would be Sigmund Freud, and they had a split, and that was over religion, and it was quite the turmoil. And unfortunately, at some point Carl Jung got very sick emotionally, thought he was what he thought was schizophrenia, and his great book Liber Norvis, the red book he created, he almost was like a hermit, and he had this very thick book that only been released in 2009 that has a lot of artwork in it, and it's very symbolic, and it is very hard to get involved, but there is a lot of crossover between those worlds of Jung and Buddhism, and how he saw the healing factors of different things that are maybe not naturally empirical evidence.
Yeah, so Jung talks a lot about symbols and that sort of thing, but so does Freud. So what's the difference? Like, what is it about how, like you talk about that schism? So like, how does one differentiate between like Freud interpreting dreams and images of that nature, and then what Jung takes it a step further, at least in my estimation?
Sure, easy question. Freud was obsessed with sex, and he was an active cocaine addict, where Carl Jung was into all things spiritual and believed in a God, whatever that God is, and therein was the split, and said, I'm out of here. And he let Freud down. Some say, as I studied, some say it was a father figure, even kind of a love figure, if you will, a master-student figure, but the split had to occur. But there's so many other things. Also in the thoughts of the ego and where that goes, taking some of the ideas. The collective unconscious is one thing that Freud was not believing in. He certainly believed in the ego, the superego, and the id, but Jung went a little bit further. So mixing that spiritualism, which is really hard to,
So that brings us to that line in Caddyshack that kind of like brings us, together. It was, at least we were talking last week about this, where Bill Murray's character has the Carl. His name's Carl, right?
Yes, it is.
He's got the pitchfork, and the one caddy's up against the shed, and he's got the pitchfork to him, and he's telling him a story about the Dalai Lama, telling him that he would have on his deathbed total unconsciousness. So he's got that going for him, which is nice. But is that, I mean, he's that's kind of a play on the total, the collective consciousness, right?
I'd say so, absolutely. And there's a book that I found out, Chris Nashawati, he wrote a book called Caddyshack, The Making of a Hollywood Cinderella Story. And he had covered all of the variables and nuances and backdrop story that is Caddyshack. So that's in there. Harold Ramis and Doug Kinney. Doug Kinney also wrote National Lampoon and was a National Lampoon writer who died tragically after all the two successes. National Lampoon's the one movie would be Animal House.
Animal House.
That's right, and he's in it. As a matter of fact, he's the guy that steals the when the band is there, when they disrupted the huge parade. That's Doug Kinney with the glasses, and I think he has one spoken line. So in turn, yeah, that's in there. So those are peppered in there, and nobody really notices those things. Apparently, Doug Kinney and Ramis were brought together, and this is really interesting. John Peters, the great movie producer and former boyfriend of Barbara Streisand, who a movie named Shampoo from 1975, which therein ties that with Warren Beatty, which is basically the hidden story about John Peters' rise from being this hairstylist shampoo guy into becoming, because he was just talking to the right people, kind of this, just right place, right time, becomes a movie producer, which he produced Batman among many, many other movies, and A Star is Born. He was in the production for the producer for Caddyshack, and came to Kinney and Ramis, and Kinney had the idea of a movie dealing about New Age religion and Buddhism in particular as a comedy. He said no. Ramis's idea was about the burgeoning Nazi party in Skokie, Illinois, and Peters said no. So they had to start, exactly. So they started working with Brian Doyle Murray, Bill Murray's brother, and started talking about him, and then golf, and then the whole thing started to grow, and it started to get funny. Actually, it was 4 hours in length.
Oh my gosh.
Was the original, cut that Peters saw. So they brought in a gentleman whose name eludes me, who was a film editor. Harold Ramis, although he had worked in movies in a side story and had worked on SCTV and was familiar with Second City TV, had no idea how to make a movie.
Right.
So that was beyond him. So this 4 hours, poor John Peters, who was maligned for some other things, said, this is a mess. You got to get this thing together. So there was just tons of dialogue. So at this point, there was 200 pages of dialogue. Wow. So that would say that's 1 minute, right? That's they say 1 page is 1 minute of film. So they had to edit this thing down to make it interesting. And Peters had the bright idea. Now, in retrospect, of not only bringing in somebody editor and editing and getting it tighter and better understood to make this comedy, but also bringing in the Gopher, which cost $500,000, which was a lot of money for 1970.
What? That costs almost as much as the shark in Jaws. What's going on with the Gopher? Wow. Was it an animatronic? I just thought it was.
It was indeed an animatronic puppet that was placed on a table. So they had that with lots of dirt thrown onto it. And interestingly enough, the voice behind the Gopher, the unnamed Gopher, was actually used Flipper audio track from the TV show Flipper from the 1960s that they had sitting on the shelf that Peters used. So Peters came in for that and rescued this thing. You had a lot of just strange things going on to make this.
I never knew that. That's interesting. You mentioned, though, that to me earlier that Harold Ramis was a Buddhist.
Harold Ramis was indeed a Buddhist, and I thought that, which also then colored his next big movie, besides all the other work he did, but another big movie, Groundhog Day, which, interestingly, on the personal front, I could not stand. Till a few years ago, I was with my daughter, and then she said, Dad, sit down and watch this with me. I think this is really interesting, my daughter, Vanessa. So in turn, I did watch it, and I really liked it. Now I see that it is completely a pay-in and homage to Samsara of rebirth, recycle until, his character, I think Phil Connors is his name, till he gets it right, until he gets life right and continues as we know how that goes. And also, interestingly enough, a groundhog and a gopher are extremely similar. Yeah. Again, why is that there?
Well, in the name Phil Connors, Pugsatani Phil, so there's no coincidence there, I'm sure. I mean, Harold Ramis,
not at all.
He knew what he was doing at that point for sure. Even Absolutely. If he didn't know how to make a movie, he was a heck of a writer.
Right.
And it comes out in Chevy Chase's character in in Caddyshack, he gets to quote the Zen poet Basho, right, about the donut and the Danish and the hole in the flute. And I don't know about you. I mean, I know that we've talked about Zen koans, but I just, that's one of my favorite things, is trying to figure out, just contemplating those imponderables and seeing where it takes one. But it's funny to see an adolescent humor movie throw in those kinds of concepts. I mean, there's so many like, just lowbrow jokes in Caddyshack. but there's still philosophy in there as well. It just cracks me up.
So those hidden nuggets that kind of really just like you said about, if I may say, about Star Wars, there's a bigger picture there than what is going on. That's how we sometimes have to eat these things, I think, is slowly, subconsciously. What they always said would happen with music and TV that would affect us, that there's this hidden meaning underneath. But I think that gives it a lot of weight, instead of just this mindless violence or comedy. But a lot of it was actually based upon the Murray family, who had a very large family, which I knew of. There's like 8, 9 kids in it, or 10 even. And his one brother, not Brian Royal or Bill, his brother, did actually win a scholarship, much like the Danny Noonan character, which, by the way, but by the way, I also found this. As for casting, now there's 2 different ideas within this Caddyshack. Again, up-and-coming people circa 1979, 1980, Michelle Pfeiffer was up for Lacey Underall and refused it due to the nudity that John Peters pushed. She said, absolutely not at all. And Cindy Morgan, the woman that actually played the role, had lots of trouble over that one, and was bothered by it, that it was, rather gratuitous. And Ramis felt that got taken over. Don Rickles was actually approached to be the Al Zverchek character, not Rodney Dangerfield. And Mickey Rourke is Danny Noonan. And that just fell apart. And so then, as you cast, things fall through. But apparently there's this story that I cannot prove, but I heard many, many moons ago, between Ted Knight and Rodney Dangerfield over a fight that happened in Florida in the mid-'60s, when Ted Knight was trying to do a comedy act, getting away from being a voiceover artist and up-and-coming actor, and wanted to do stand-up, which, if you're not good at it, we know that doesn't work. Apparently, Miami, because of Jackie Gleason, was becoming another area of a huge area, much like Vegas and Los Angeles or Hollywood or New York, was becoming this other mecca of entertainment, right? And apparently he was bombing on stage. He was dying, as they say. And Dangerfield came in, probably, as I understood, a little bit tuned up, and was with his crew and heckled him to the point of that it set Ted Knight off. And actually what became the movie Caddyshack actually was happening here in this mid-'60s nightclub, and supposedly was the lore of many of those in comedy, where legends and stories begin that these two didn't like each other. Well, they didn't really care each other. But if we think about it too, there's 2 older sets. We have this Rodney Dangerfield and Ted Knight characters, Smale, right now, Zverchek, who didn't like each other. And then underneath you have Billy Murray, Carl Spackler, and then you have Ty Webb, Chevy Chase, who also didn't like each other. So you have these different ideas going on. They're both based upon real life. Apparently, all 4 were okay by the end of things, because it was a success, but particularly Murray and Chase, since they had to tie together a scene very quickly, which Sean Peters again said, you don't have a scene with 2 of your biggest stars. So they quickly wrote that scene in there between which is hilarious.
Practicing the night before he goes to the big round of golf. They've got all the money on, and he's practicing and hits it into Carl's domicile, for lack of a better word. I guess he's sleeping in the garage where they keep the lawn equipment or whatever. And
That's right.
So I remember hearing a story about I don't know if this is true or not, about Rodney Dangerfield. Was that his first feature film? I think.
Yes, it was, as a matter of fact, and he had no idea of what the word action meant. Actually, Harold Ramis, who was a novice at making films, at least had been around, a set. And he said, and the very first scene they filmed was in the hat shop, right? In the hat shop. And he said, action.
Looks good on you, though.
Yeah, he said, act right. He said, you get a bowl of soup with a hat.
You get a free bowl of soup with this hat? What a terrible hat.
It's a terrible hat. So he said action 3 times, and Dangerfield had no idea. what he meant. He said, Rodney, why don't you come? He said, I don't understand. He said, action means come out there. He said, you mean do my bit? He went, yeah. He said, can you
Yes.
just say do my bit? He went, yes. He
Yes.
went,
Good
do your
director.
bit. He said, action, do your bit. He came out and did his bit, and he said, that was it. And away he went. But yes, Rodney was very nervous and actually had no idea how to golf. So he actually had to buy a teacher to teach him to learn the rudimentary bits of golf so that he could actually show up. Yeah, Rodney was more up and coming at that point due to his appearances in Vegas, New York, and the Tonight Show, more so than Rickles at that point, who still was big, but not. Rodney was up and coming, and that certainly broke him through.
So apparently they were shooting a scene outdoors, and Rodney's just tearing it up. Like he's got all the lines. He's kind of dominating the scene. He's doing great, and the whole cast is trying not to laugh, right? And the character who played Danny's rival, I forget the name of the other caddy who plays kind of a sleazebag guy who's fighting for the championship as well. Right. That actor apparently relayed this in the scene in the part that I saw, the interview I saw with him, and he said, "Yeah, Rodney comes back from the shot. And we're all like, wow, amazed by his talent, and he's like, he's sweating profusely, and it's hot, but like he's really sweating, and he says, man, that was great." And Rodney says, I'm dying out there. Nobody's laughing." It's like, it's a film, Rodney. Nobody can laugh. They'll ruin it if they laugh. They're doing great. Don't worry, But like that was just, the translation from stage where he had that immediate feedback to the movie, which is like take.
Right.
And then, it's work. And you don't have that immediate
as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's very interesting that he was what would become legendary, and then has grown in status. Certainly, more so. Due to just how golf has taken off, and there's been many parodies, and it's obviously it's a classic movie, and certainly probably one of the most proper movies about golf besides Happy Gilmore and the Magic Comedies, right? Many others, at least proper comedies about that. And it's an interesting topic to even have, and it just seems very happenstance, and as it turns out, it was.
So. Yeah. And I mean, there's just so many great, Ted Knight's character just being so uptight, that typical, like, that archetype of the rich, snooty, elitist, and yet like can't relax, he had all the money in the world and still can't relax. He's got that shock white hair and that red face all the time, and
right.
Well, we're waiting, like kinds of things, and his grandson or his nephew or whatever, I'll have a hamburger or a cheeseburger. You'll get nothing and like it, just
Spalding, right?
Yeah,
Spalding.
So,
yeah, right.
So
I mean, right, and it's great. He actually knew how to play, an antagonist. I mean, it's always more fun to play a James Bond villain than actually be James Bond.
Oh, no doubt.
He ate up, and he's certainly pretentious. And again, you actually nailed the theme, as it turns out, with that is what he was trying to say, Harold Ramis, and what Kenny was trying to say about both these things about New Age religion and this burgeoning Nazi party in Illinois was this kind of this bourgeois kind of versus this upper class sort of class system. So there's a class system thing going on in also a theme in Caddyshack that's apparent through the whole thing. So they were also wanted to talk about that, how this was happening. We have a Dr. Beeper. We have, we have a religious figure. We have a lot of others figure kind of in higher places, and kind of this poor Danny Noonan guy that wants to get a scholarship.
The religion, I forgot until just now. I had forgotten about the religious figure. When he's playing, he's got to play through the round, even though there's a lightning storm, there's wind, it's just terrible. And at one point he says, the good Lord wouldn't interrupt the best round of golf of my life. And the rain just comes down even harder. And it's just, that wonderful, ego in the face of everything else, of all reality, the ego and pushing through, and it's a funny, it's a slapstick scene, really, man against nature, but it's really also kind of deep, And then later, of course, they
It
do
is
a
a deep
nice
meaning
little,
too.
there's this one little line later when they're all back at the clubhouse and they're going to make the bet, right? And Chevy Chase has that great line where he tells Ted Knight, Ted Knight's character, not to sell himself short, that he's an incredible slouch. But
Right. You're a tremendous slouch.
Ted Knight goes over to the character, is he a priest or is he a minister?
He's a priest. I believe he is a priest. Yes.
He says, you're a man of God. And he's so disappointed that he just ruined his best round of golf. He says, there is no God. Just,
right.
like golf is that important to you that it would fundamentally change your core belief, like that.
Right. So there's all those things they're bubbling underneath all that, of what seems like a zany, just wacky film. But I mean, I think that's how those things work. That's why I think the follow-up Caddyshack 2, besides not having most of the stars in it, didn't work as well.
Right.
The script wasn't too many years later. And
you get 5 amazing comedians like that. How are you going to lose, But
right.
It's right. But it does tie into Jung, Jung talks about that stuff like kind of bubbling underneath that we can't we're not even really dissecting. And when he talks about the collective consciousness, is he talking about a mystical consciousness that each one of us can tap into, or is he talking about DNA? Yes. Is he talking about learned experience? No, he's talking about all those things. Thing. Oh,
yes, he's talking about a lot of things, which actually that ties in with epigenetics and how that all kind of ties in. That that we cannot sometimes undo who we are in the collective unconscious. That these are imprints, as he was calling them. So we cannot undo that a lot of the time. So these are things, archetypes, as you said even earlier, but not in alluding to Jung, but that we cannot escape some of these things. That they're in our DNA, and that it's our choice to then learn how to undo that, which we can tie in with Buddhism about this samsara and recycling these lives for Groundhog Day, which, by the way, apparently this would make sense in Groundhog Day, if I could just say just in a short amount. They cut out a scene and actually didn't even write it into where a former girlfriend placed a voodoo curse on him because the Phil Connors character stood her up. So she said she was going to get him back to repeat his life till he figured out to get out of his egotism and being egotistical. So they felt that was best left unsaid. So
yeah, see, that's the thing. I think a lot of times when writing, as a writer, that was my discipline in college, one of them, and I still do sometimes. Sometimes writers feel it necessary to be explicit about the devices that happen to their characters. That is not necessary most of the time. You don't have, I didn't have to know why Phil was repeating his day in order to accept the fact that he was repeating his day. I didn't have to know how the universe worked. I just, it was a fluke of nature and time, it just happened. I didn't have to have the voodoo curse. I don't need that. So it's important, I think, to trust one's audience, to know, to trust the audience's intelligence and not overwrite, to leave space for people to interpret what they wish to interpret. I mean, you're talking about, this is something that I debate with my Star Wars friends a lot. We'll talk about Joseph Campbell, and we'll talk about the hero's journey. And people will say, oh yeah, it's all over Star Wars. And I'll say, is it? I mean, is it what did George Lucas sit down and say, I am going to write a character who takes Joseph Campbell's hero's journey, or are we laying that on top of this after the fact? It's hard for me to say. I mean, I don't know. What's your opinion?
My opinion is he based a large portion of that on the hero's journey, but also, on, Akira Kurosawa movies, The Seven Samurai, and a lot of other ideas. And I mean, it's the novelty of it, is just right place, right time. He's an interesting filmmaker, reluctant filmmaker, but I think he had some leanings towards that
towards Campbell's, but not solely. I mean, there's some other stories. I mean, the Bible could be in there as well, or any other story that goes in there. I mean, it's not exclusively an homage to Joseph Campbell's works, but I mean, there's a lot in there that make up that what is the Star Wars original trilogy. He's just an interesting guy and a reluctant filmmaker, just constantly making one movie to sell the next movie to keep doing what he had to do to create Industrial Light and Magic. And maybe that isn't it, but I'm sure there's just a whole lot of Campbell's, work. There's a lot going on there. So some true, some not.
I think it's interesting. I think that it's possible to make the argument for the second, for Empire Strikes Back, and then certainly the Return of the Jedi, the throne room scene where there's that three-way power triangle, that struggle going on between the Emperor, Darth Vader, and Luke Skywalker. There is no doubt in my mind that by the third movie, there is a deep episode 6 for those of you who aren't doing it chronologically.
Episode 6, that's right.
Yeah. So there's definitely there's a psychological story going on there. But that's
sure, absolutely.
But that's not. But I don't think that's there in Star Wars. I think the original Star Wars, A New Hope, is.
It's a standalone movie, isn't it? It could be a standalone movie. Are you saying?
I agree. I think it's a standalone movie, but I also think it's light. I think it's like Mark Hamill said at one point during shooting, about halfway through the shoot, he realized it's the Wizard of Oz. We're saving the fairy princess. We've got the lion, the cowardly lion with us. We've got the Tin Man. We got C-3PO, the Tin Man. Like he said it's a fable. And there were times actually, I guess, where George Lucas has always been accused of writing dialogue that actors can't deliver. And the actors would say they would say things, they would ask him for direction. He's also been accused of wanting to make movies without actors as well. But that's by actors, But the actors would ask for more direction, and he would say things like, "Don't worry, it's for kids, Don't worry too much, it's for kids, And the first one was, I think it was for kids. It just happened to hit the kid in all of us,
Right.
I mean,
right place, right time.
It was perfect.
It doesn't have to be. I was a kid as well. I didn't enjoy it. I mean, I was not on. I was 8, so that wasn't really on my on my radar screen. But it certainly was. Empire Strikes Back was. I was into it completely. But I mean, I enjoyed it, but I didn't go see it, and I actually didn't see it till the early 80s. You might find this interesting, going back to Caddyshack. Harold Ramis and Doug Kenny wanted Pink Floyd to do the music. How about that?
That amazing. That would have been different.
And they turned it flatly down. They got an early draft and said absolutely not at all.
We're too serious. The wall. We're serious artists here. We can't possibly do that. That's a shame. Right.
So John Peters, John Peters, who was tied in with production, again came to the rescue. Kenny Loggins actually went for the role that went to Kris Kristofferson in The Star Is Born. He went up for it, as did it was offered to Elvis. Elvis turned it down. So they went to choice number 2, which was Kenny Loggins. Kenny Loggins did some testing for it, but did not get it because his acting skills weren't really that good. But Kristofferson could mumble his way through and actually was meant to be. But Peters never forgot him, and Peters thought he was a great writer and could come up with things quickly on the fly. He saw an early part of the film and came up immediately, said it was hilarious, and wrote I'm All right off the bat, which I also sent you in an email. That middle part of the song, that comes out, you hear a different voice. That's Eddie Money, who for free and uncredited sings that part. And then really towards the end of his life, which was a few years ago, said, I never got any credit. I didn't get any money. That's me in there. And I never knew that, because I said, well, sure, it doesn't sound like Kenny Loggins. But that's a whole different story. But yeah, Loggins got it and said, this is funny and I can do this. And he was, I think, relatively popular at that point. But again, that was one of Peter's guys that he had, at hand. But the Floyd said no. I can't even imagine.
I love Floyd, and I didn't know that. That's really interesting, and it's a shame.
I didn't either.
in 1980, you got Queen doing Flash Gordon, one of the campiest
Well, that's
movies of
true.
all time, and one of the best rock
Sure.
and roll soundtracks to a movie, I think, arguably of all time.
Yes, one of the greatest. Yeah, it certainly
I
made their
mean,
career even better than it already was. That was part of their high point between 75 and 80,
yeah,
would be the Flash Gordon soundtrack, and really was actually, I think, in terms of bands, they weren't doing that, where they were doing even bits of dialogue. They were punctuating that. And actually, Queen sounded so much different than they ever had when they did that for De Laurentiis's. I believe he produced that
he did.
Flash Gordon. But I believe at that point, not only was Pink Floyd have nothing to do with something zany, but also I believe they were putting all their effort into The Wall, which then subsequently became a big movie in itself.
Yeah.
Some years later, so all their energy was into that. So it would seem strange. They weren't known for their up music, but who knows? It might have been a whole other.
No. I mean, if you think of The Wall and you think of Caddyshack, they're dissonant. They just don't. They don't have. They're not even in the same universe.
No, not even
not at all. Just in The Wall.
Same universe. Pink Floyd's not known for doing that kind of thing. They do it for their own purposes, but I don't think they're much for giving out their music like a lot of artists are. I don't think they're really well known. And then, as it turns out, if Kenny Loggins didn't do that, he wouldn't have gone on to do Footloose. He wouldn't have gone on to do
Top Gun.
Right, he was a Top Gun. He was a go-to guy.
I mean, the Highway to the Danger Zone. That song was everywhere in 1985. Everywhere, like it was just.
And we both know because of that, right? And because of that movie, a lot of guys enlisted immediately, and women, into the armed forces specifically because of that movie. But yeah, that was his calling card. He wrote 4 songs really quick, watching the early rushes and an early print of Caddyshack, and said, "Oh, I'm inspired." So away he went and started writing. This is hilarious. He wrote 4 songs on the spot. And, at that point, I mean, I think he was more known for Loggins and Messina. He had some success at that point, but was still coming out of the Loggins and Messina
But Loggins
era.
and Messina, is that Pac-Man Fever? Was that one of their songs? I can't.
No, not a Loggins and Messina is Your Mama Don't Dance.
Okay.
Pac-Man Fever was another a couple, which we'll have to figure that out at another time to find out.
Sorry about that. I'll have to look that one up.
That's okay. Loggins and Messina, Jimmy Messina from formerly Buffalo Springfield and Poco.
So what's a Loggins and Messina hit?
Your Mama Don't Dance. Your Daddy Don't Rock and Roll.
Oh, that's a great song.
Absolutely. Great little duo. Their first album, Sitting In. Kenny Loggins sitting in with Jim Messina. So away it went. And Loggins was just one of those writers that just wasn't making. He just kept nipping and nipping. And if it wasn't, there's no 2 ways about it. If it wasn't for I'm All Right and Caddyshack, none of this,
that wouldn't happen for him. Yeah.
No, he was be fair to middling at that point as an artist. He had to do something quick. He was struggling actually. So just Peters had him on speed dial.
That has happened to so many. I've heard so many stories where musicians, like I just heard one with Iggy Pop, about Iggy Pop.
Oh, sure.
And I was watching the movie Repo Man.
Oh, sure.
And he wrote
Cox.
Yeah. And he wrote some stuff for that. And he said he got a call from the director and he's like, I'm living in like literally an apartment with no furniture, a light bulb, with no shade. Like it's like as bad as you can think about it. West Hollywood, just absolutely down on my luck. Nobody wants to hire me. I forget what exactly was going through his life at that point, but he had a bit of a bad boy reputation. And that was perfect for that movie though, because it was all about anarchism and, and
oh, sure.
And desperation.
Right.
And, yeah.
Right. Iggy was pretty bad in 1983, 1984 when that came out. So he was just getting sober, which I think he did like permanently in 86. But so, yeah, he was at the tail end of a life. He was missing a front tooth. A lot of film of him, of him during that era. He was not well. So getting that shot was great. And he was still playing a lot of clubs. He wasn't the Iggy Pop that we now know of now from the 90s, Trainspotting, the 2000s. This was Iggy still playing clubs, punk clubs, rock clubs, not getting a lot of coverage, not selling a lot of albums, an underground artist.
Well, really humble too, in a lot of ways. I have one of his albums from, I'd say it's the early 90s. And I, on the liner notes, actually it had to be like maybe 93 or so, because it's after like email starts to get popular, because it says right at the bottom, it says, if here's my email address, drop me a line, I'll probably reply to you. You know what I mean?
American Caesar.
Yeah, I thought it was American Caesar. And then I was thinking, no, that's a documentary about MacArthur, you know.
Yeah, Brick by Brick was his like watershed moment.
And definitely American Caesar. He's, you know, shirtless on the front. He's got
that's right.
Yeah.
That's right. That's right. I mean, that guy, James Jewel Osterberg of Detroit was a, what a character. That guy, there's not enough time on this program to talk about what he's done and where he's gone and the neat things and the chances. He turned down to be to replace Jim Morrison, and arguably covered a lot of his vocal stylings, same baritone kind of crooning, to continue his own artist vision of doing what he wanted, was working with David Bowie in Berlin, and their work was very influential and was meant to be, and coming off of drugs and alcohol, and really just taking up roles like, that was a big thing, going back to Repo Man and that whole idea, which I just actually revisited that myself, seeing how that worked. Alex Cox, who did Sid and Nancy as well, the movie, and was originally had the Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas. He did that, and actually they took him off of that, I believe, for the gentleman whose name eludes me right now, who was part of the Monty Python, the American.
Terry Gilliam.
Pardon?
Terry Gilliam.
Terry Gilliam, that is correct. Yes, Terry Gilliam of Brazil and many other films. Yes,
Time
Gilliam.
Bandits, The Adventures of Baron Munchausen.
That's right. That's
Fisher
right. He
King.
took over.
Yeah, he's one of my top 3 directors. So if you ever want to talk about that, we can go into that. But now that you said that you just revisited Repo Man, I think maybe we found the subject for our next discussion, because
sure,
that's a deep movie. There's a lot of neat stuff, and there's a lot of Easter eggs.
A lot of stuff going on in there.
Yeah, there's a lot of stuff.
Yeah, a lot of stuff in there, and of a different time. And we have, at this point, again, we're looking at people. There's a couple of really cool things in that. You have not only the director, you have the music. You also have kind of independent looking films. You have Emilio Estevez before he's the Emilio Estevez that we know. So he's kind of cutting edge. You and I would remember that time when people were more cutting edge and then were not mass produced. You have Harry Dean Stanton, I believe, as well, who's, just a great character actor and has been in a million movies.
And he's got his own philosophy too, which I don't think you can pigeonhole into any particular ism, but man, it's a Harry Dean Stantonism. You ever see him interviewed off camera? A lot of the stuff that comes through with his character Bud in Repo Man there's a lot of that's just him. Like it's pretty interesting. I think he was given a lot of leeway. I think Alex Cox let him say, just here, ad lib a little bit, we'll see what we get. One of those kinds of directors.
I'd say so with someone like Harry Dean Stanton, who at that point Cox knew that he was working with guys with Wim Wenders. He was working with a lot of, underground directors, making not huge production movies, although Stanton had been around since the 50s, he was part of Dennis Hopper's crowd and had been around. So, even though he was known, they're giving him a lot of leeway into what looks like really European made film is what I would say that is, more Euro made film. That to me, again, we didn't want to leave that to another time, previewing it, but again, you have Cox, who I believe is a British person. I'm not mistaken.
I think you're right.
Yeah, I would say so. So he was tied, and he's tied in heavily with music and the leeway that he had with that, and bands like the Clash. He had as well, and it's tied in completely. That's an '80s thing too. Elvis Costello too, as well, and a very young Courtney Love.
And actually, there's a scene where the Circle Jerks are on stage, actually.
Oh, sure.
One of the clubs. And they're like, and Emilio Estevez says something like, yeah, I remember when I used to like these guys,
Golden hits. That's like,
so how much, candor, how much being able to make fun of yourself. I mean, that was part of the punk era, though. That was part of the punk thing, was you made fun of everything, including yourself. No, but you didn't take anything seriously,
Sure, LA punk's a whole different thing. So you have that Hollywood LA punk, California punk, which is a whole different thing than the British or New York punk. So that was of a very certain time. It looks like 1980 to 1984 is definitely that kind of, and that's catching. I guess Cox is, a Repo Man caught the Zeitgeist, right? That caught that moment in time of that era of looking a certain way and dressing a certain way. And again, Estevez was, underground, and they were, and his brother and the father, they were taken seriously. And then it seems like the 80s rolled on, and Brat Pack, and Lord knows what Charlie Sheen has done. That, this is a guy that was in Platoon and Wall Street. So, I mean, Estevez has a great thing. And Martin Sheen was in Apocalypse Now, which is a whole, you could do, I would not give you suggestions, but that is that would be a big thing, the Apocalypse Now, and Joseph
we could
Conrad,
do Apocalypse Now, but I'd have to reread Heart of Darkness for the 50th time. But it's the Conrad, the whole thing is just it's this. And what's amazing about that is if you've ever seen the documentary of the making of that film, at one point, Coppola kind of throws his arms up in the air, just like you said with Caddyshack, and says, I got all this footage, but I have no movie. Like, I don't know what I got here. He came back from the Philippines. He's like,
3.5 years.
Well, you cut it together and it's genius, just genius, in my opinion.
Right. It's absolute genius. Yeah. It ends, again, talking about Bridge, it ends in the 70s. You have Dennis Hopper completely out of his mind, but a complete genius, completely out of his mind.
Brando comes in like 40 pounds overweight. He's supposed to be this guy who went back to be an Army Ranger in his 30s, and meanwhile he's like rotund. So in order to disguise that, they have to do that crazy lighting scene where he's half lit and half dark, and then that becomes symbolism. And he's sweating, and he's
right. He's in black. He's in all black, right?
Yeah, right. I mean, like, all that happens.
God, it's amazing. That
doesn't happen if he comes in not overweight, right? We get a regular scene of him.
No, he's right. He's not this kind of warlord. And then you have people, you have what's his name leaving the set after being there for too long, whose name eludes me, who was actually the role that Martin Sheen had. It was in a lot of stuff.
I know Sheen said he was almost having a nervous breakdown when he was shooting that. He said when he was in the hotel room, he's like, he said to the director, he said to Coppola, he's like, let me hurt myself. And he's like, what? Let me. He's like,
Harvey Keitel.
Harvey Keitel, yes. Yeah, Harvey Keitel.
Yeah,
actually, what's funny?
It was all of.
If you want to do a 7 degrees of separation kind of thing, if you're ever playing that game, Harrison Ford has a very small part at the beginning of that movie. He's giving the briefing.
That is correct.
Yeah, Martin Sheen.
Which I will proffer to you that this has been brought up before on probably many of things, that I would actually say not only Apocalypse Now or Repo Man, I would go out of my way to say that Harrison Ford was this real life, I'm sure you've heard this real life legend and friend of those guys at Zoetrope Films, which were in the late 60s, early 70s. You have Coppola, you have Spielberg and Lucas are all buddies, and who their carpenter / pot dealer, I don't know where to put it, was Harrison Ford, who they said was the coolest guy, and all three made movies based upon his behaviors and just how cool he was to him, and sized and had this bromance for an up and coming Harrison Ford guy that it's amazing. It's that in itself, many of people have written how that just turned into a whole other thing, how they're just, this guy is just, there's so many things we can do with this person. He's just his behaviors, I think he's just kind of a laid back California guy, but they knew what to do with him in Harrison, the right place, right time. But that is Harvey Keitel, who walked away. A 17-year-old Lawrence Fishburne, who was there for all 3 years, who said the only thing
Yes, the only thing that he said, Marlon Brando said in all that time, was there was a magician on the night before wrapping up. I carried this story with me a lot. There was a magician that was there to entertain the cast and crew. And he said Brando didn't say a word to anybody, to nobody, would walk nothing, nada. And he said he got to sit beside him during the magician. He said after 3 years, the only thing on and off with Brando coming and going, he said the only thing that Brando said is he whispered in my ear, he said, that's all BS. He said after 3 years, he said the only person he would talk to in private would be Francis Ford Coppola. He said 3 years. And I saw that on Letterman. He said, this is all BS. And he finally spoke. But yeah, that's a 17-year-old Frederick Forrest, one of the Bottoms brothers. I forget who. Sam Bottoms, I believe. But yeah, that's Billy Graham's in that. That's a whole other conversation. That's the end of the 70s going into the 80s. Apocalypse Now.
Sure.
Wagner's Bride of Valkyries. But there you have it.
Never get off the boat, man. Never get off the boat.
Never get off the boat.
Yep. There's tigers, man. There's tigers in there. You don't mess with that.
How many times does Dennis Hopper say man?
Man.
Probably he says man quite a bit. Bug-eyed is all get out. He says man more times than you care to mention. But I mean, he just eats scenery for his whole part in there. He's just chewing it up. And without
he's the sycophant, right? He's the convert.
He's a sycophant.
He's the one that goes, you don't understand, man. The man was a plan, man. Like, you don't understand. Right. Like, he's the guy that went there just like this. So that's possibly Sheen's character's fate, right?
Yes.
If he could do that, he could end up being an acolyte, a worshiper of Kirk.
That is correct.
But
sycophant.
He's gonna play his. He's gonna do his mission, and he does.
It's not gonna be an errand boy.
Yeah. Cool. Awesome. So we got a lot of stuff to talk about next time. Is there anything
Hopefully there's the next time?
Anything you want to do to wrap this one up?
Nothing. I just want to say thank you and thank you and thank you for this opportunity. And I'm very grateful and humbled that someone would want to speak to me on a Sunday afternoon. And hopefully we're entertaining those out there who are enjoying Pittsburgh Pats podcast.
Well, if everybody's still here, go ahead and smash like for us. We appreciate that. And Kris, it sounds like we're going to have a couple more conversations.
I hope so, sir.
Thanks. So I'm going to just tell everybody to have a good day and do something nice for somebody today without getting caught. Have a great day.